we just visited a place that one is kind of not supposed to see in their life. And that somehow one is to have the premise in the life that they're in is that it's their life. You know, and you then perceive moments where you're seeing your life not from ownership of it, but you're surprised by the momentary perception. There are certain perceptions that don't have time. Like I was saying, that part of the brain, if something happened to it as a kid, if there's a similar thing that happens 40 years later, there's a similar reaction to it that's built into the system already. And that part of the brain doesn't have time. It just has the hurt in it.
Right.
You see. So the hurt is not, it wasn't so much that the hurt was caused. It was caused, but it was also captured, that part of the brain. So when there is a similarity of odors or sounds or situations, there will be a protective element that then immediately the immune system must send. That part of the brain must be related to the immune system. It must overreact.
Mm-hmm.
But that overreaction is changing the climate. You see, in the past, the oppressiveness around sexuality. And the oppressiveness was almost like slavery with Black people, was also how people were locked into certain roles, you know, and they played them out that role as if they were really that role also.
Right, and still do.
Yeah, so basically, they make a living off the role, and at the same time, there is a kind of you see a moment where your human is violated or something. It can be small or strong, it doesn't matter, but you see a moment where you were a thing, or you were lost in the story, and you see that. But then I say, if I look at your movement, I see that memory is the strongest aspect. And I say, why? I say, because in the truth, the deeper ones, even though they're lost, when the form is lost, there is a feeling there, and that usually comes in absence. In presence, the literal situation, the day-to-day, then unless it's completely poetic or something, you have somewhere to go and the person bumps into you and having nothing to do, and you're okay. Who changed the toilet paper roll?
Who did the dishes?
So you see that there's the evocative and there's the everydayness simultaneously happening. But that when you are in the everydayness, the evocative is only seen in retrospect, in loss in some sort. So you understand that there is somehow a journey that one is in while they're living. They're also on a journey of some sort. So we perceive what the Buddha said, and we perceive what Jesus may say, but we're seeing it. And then we see, okay, they saw their version of it, the simultaneity of life. While you have a role in the life, there's also other parallel situations going on. Is someone else on? Yeah.
Yes.
Urja.
Oh, Urja, how are you doing? Now here's Urja. This is what we was the simultaneity or the duality, but I've been talking about missing. And missing as being, because I think, what's her name again? Susanna, then, who kind of, we had a break because of some screw up and putting her up in the apartment or having it ready for her one time. And somehow she was hurt in a way that could have said, hey, look, let's have just a moment. But somehow it seemed much more exaggerated reaction where I didn't even have anything to do with the picture, but I just said, well, hold it, why not? But the hurt was so great that it ran with it like a possessive, and it's true. And it can be as small as they didn't have toilet paper out there for you or something. They forgot to put toilet paper or something, which seems minor, but somehow Jesus was going to visit and you didn't have toilet paper for Jesus. That would be a very wrong thing to do, wouldn't it? Okay. So let's say that the hurt doesn't have to be looking like it's nonsense. In fact, the more nonsensical it is, probably the deeper it goes. And it does give you a picture of what's waiting for you in this relationship. Something of the reaction over what seems to be minor does give you a picture if you're going to see something pretty deeply. Because the relationship that connects with you is also around seeing. And seeing isn't laid out. It usually comes to you accidentally so that you can't control it. So we were early discussing missing. And so when there was a message to reconnect or something before they go, then Mary wrote back, but then I had mentioned that there is something in the missing that's lost in the getting together. There's something in the missing. The break was not, even though it was dopey, and it has to be over nothing usually. It's over something. That the next phase is a conscious one. And it is the conscious one about what we've been sharing around living and dying and this and that without it being spooky or a movie, but an actual ability to perceive what is happening in our life. And you see, to see what is happening in our life means that our life enters into my life. So I'm also seeing it from the other parallel perspectives that are usually hidden. So then in readings and such, you see that there are touches upon how to do this and what that means. And you see attempts to have that kind of what would be lucid dreaming, where something in you is lucid while you're living the story that you're in. So then you also see that missing is not only then a phone call or how you're doing, but that's one aspect of it. If the person gets out of it or they say, I'm sorry, but it was your fault. Also, you make a negotiation. So you see different forms of missing. But you see if there's as the missing goes, you see that the missing then is no longer a fault that you have to get rid of. The missing itself is an awakening of some degree.
What about when the
you see
missing?
Inherent in relationship, absences is more profound than presence. Anytime presence, you may get in the way or need to use the bathroom at the same time or whatever. It can be clunky, but absence then opens up this whole accordion of sound.
Danny, what about when the missing is painful? What do you just sit with that? Do you just?
I know I can't say just that there's there is something that's happening, and you are, and it's still obscure to you because so then when it's painful in a way that wants to get out of the story.
So then diving, because I've sat with that and just diving into.
No, you're seeing something different, and you're seeing the dichotomy between being you as a person with a literal life, and you as a person who is somehow having communication with others around an energy or a feeling or around love or something that seems to be disappearing. And then you see it's also disappearing because now it's become an industry. So then you have people acting out good feelings and this and that. So some of the discovery, which is, so then you see that loss was also part of discovery and authenticity. And that one, if in fact they told you from the get-go, look, you're going to enter into this space, your heart's going to be broken, you're going to be, and I say, they said, oh, that's good. And they say, why? And I say, a broken heart is evidence of genuineness, where they can't hide themselves in it. They're okay. So they say, well, then you're seeing it from a different place. And I said, look, you don't want to glamorize it, but you understand that what it would be to make a movie where people actually experience with you in the movie a broken heart, to convey creatively. And you can then view artworks that have touched you and that kind of, they did represent. And it didn't have to be a specific issue. You saw that a broken heart was in it, and they would show you the loss of a baby or something, and immediately you would go to that feeling. In the neighborhood, have that feeling, even if it wasn't yours or whatever, you knew that you'd look away, you knew, so you knew that you were protecting certain feelings in yourself of not happening. And you're also protecting that in the circumstance that you're in. The very thing that would allow a perception has to come in a genuine way. That would be your loss. And you understand your loss. If it comes from running away, that would lay a number again on the situation. So the loss can be as simple as your lover is going somewhere next week, and you will see, and you see the absence. You see the interplay of absence and presence. And you see that in the initial love affair, the presence has absence in it. There's a kind of concern of absence. So you are many dimensions of things that are happening. And to some extent, your body is adapting to that. So once you have, so you understand that somehow an attraction to you in some way creates an honest conversation or an interaction. In some cases, a friendship. And in the friendship, then what happens in the individual lives become a sort of weaving. Now, there's two elements in the circumstance. The pursuit of happiness, then in the story, makes everything that is less than the pursuit of happiness into some challenge. But in fact, those challenges are experiences in life that one is going through. And so there's two things happening at the same time that one is navigating a survival atmosphere. You see that there are other processes at play. That are stuck in memory. So you see, if you talk about Paris, for instance, you're talking about a memory of a certain Okay. So it has a privacy in it and it has a sharing in it, but if in fact it has a sharing in it, is that when I grew up in New York, I didn't know it was a special place. I only found out later how cool it was. When I was in it, it wasn't that cool. It was always the trouble and a lot of problems going on. So it's only in retrospect that you saw how hip it was and how this it was. When you were there, everybody was broke. There was this or that going on, fights and girlfriends and boyfriends, and so it was a immersion in an atmosphere where it seemed natural. And in that immersion, there were hookups and connections that seemed like that, simple as that. and you see you have a story. And you see that you can tell your story, but then it ceases to be your story. As you look into it, you see that you were part of a whole larger story that was happening on different levels. The individual level, the collective level, the association, what was happening collectively around. So if they tell a story about you now, they'll also include the virus in the story for everyone. And they say, well, what was the virus? And they say, the virus was, they made it into a thing that was invisible. So it was actually the fear of death injected into the story.
Mm.
And so then there's a collective fear of dying because of this or that. And others say, screw you with that. I've got Jesus. And some say, I'm in the army. And some say, okay, let's go along with it for our neighbors. And so let's say, as the dust settles down into the population, they have different versions of what's going on. So then I say, and with a schmuck who has no real version to hold on to because he sees different movies happening. And there's some movies you'd like to go to and some movies that are not so cool. And it does seem like the news resembles that. And life is resembling when you go to one of those theaters and they got 10 movies playing, you choose a movie to see out of 10 movies, and you're making a choice. What appeals to you, what doesn't appeal to you. So you see that what is happening, and it just awakens processes that are happening for us. And when you see it, you see that somehow one did the worst thing they could do, and if in fact they wanted to be sane and intelligent people and make a living, but that we made the dumbest decisions that almost guaranteed a broken heart. And you see that nobody could talk you out of it, nobody can say that, no matter what they do. And so then they say, well, hold on, the one thing that they fear for you is the broken heart, but the one thing that you seem determined to have. And they say, well, what is an ingredient of the broken heart? That there was a genuine feeling at one point. So you see then what it means that there is a genuineness where somehow the feelings create a reality. But as the feelings normalize and shift to memory, you see the life is almost an artwork of frequencies and energies in itself. And it's not about what to do. It comes out of the perception. The doer is not the boss of the circumstance. The doer is just like the brakes that you would put on in the car or the shifting or whatever. The doer is not an AI ingredient like the robot taking over. You see you're coming from a place. And you see to some extent, like I discussed with you earlier, that we're kind of deciding to live, but it's not deciding like I'm deciding. Because the deciding is not death itself, that you then have to do something. So the doer is not in the measure. It is, in fact, you see your body and your being is, in fact, measuring itself. And it includes you in it, not as a medical condition. There may be a byproduct as a medical condition, but you see the essence of the condition and the pain relationship to it is to give it some attention. But in the dialogue that we share, you see that, again, the dying and living are important ingredients in the happening. And somehow you found so when you say, Kai, about waiting, that's one of the tools you have if you perceive it, but it is not that you're put into a solitary confinement of waiting. It's as if you're waiting for the eggs to cook or something. or it's
Right.
it's as if you're waiting for the movie to be over. So waiting is not like a forced gun to your head situation, but that's how it does come across. But in the perceptive sense, you see that waiting is an aspect of what you're doing. Now, when I came back the first time from India, after meeting Doctor that time, but again, the basic premise of mystical India shifted, and it was becoming the same story that you had in New York, then shifted to India. Like all the New York people that went in
Right.
India at
Right.
that time, and they got to be swamis immediately, while all these other Indian sadhus they had to wait 50 years. Yeah. So generally, you saw the same show business move that went through the story with authenticity at the same time.
Mhm.
Because in retrospect, it was, how the hell could I have done that? How could we have done this and made that? Just left everything and do this and change the life around. And so then you have a perspective on what actually happened. And you see that somehow it's written in the story. That there is a pursuit that has a broken heart in it as part of its measure. And that one cannot, but as it gets into ground zero in earth, it is an addiction, it is craziness, it is that, it is, because its premise of survival is that it should work and have a literal job and work and earn a living and manage the budget, and that is an aspect, but you also see the punishment that comes if that is not the dominant force field. But that one's life and living are a creative act itself. Well, that's what, since we've met with each other, that's what it's coming down to, that the life that we're in is a creative stage that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And that our ownership of ourselves is more like the actor's ownership of the deep character they're in. The character may become their depth of their life in some way, because it teaches you that something that you can't see. And it's not that you can't see it, it's that you are avoiding seeing it because the form will then shift.
But don't we want the form to shift?
Well, when you have a form based on intuition, and yet you have a continuity, then you start to see that it's missing a conversation, and it may be, "Mommy, why are you doing this?" And then you realize how dumb you are. And doing something, you understand that somehow everyone's mature enough now to have a conversation about where are we and where are we going with it. But you also understand that somehow it comes from a sentiment, and somehow missing is in the sentiment. But if you're in these, you understand missing.
I don't think I do understand missing.
You do understand the intuitive element where you miss someone and you get a letter from them or something, and somehow there's a connection, or you thought of their name and then all of a sudden you see a picture of them. So all of a sudden, what looks like suddenness, you see that simple missing, and then there's the Mirabai form of missing,
Right.
where the longing is so deeply that you kind of incarnate the person.
I feel like I have that missing for beloved who.
Yes, but when she incarnates Krishna, it's not the literal Krishna. She then has Krishna manifested, where the husband sees something and releases his literal hold on the story.
Right.
Perceptively. But then Krishna is an atmosphere that she enters into.
Okay.
You see, in other words, the mother, the wife, to this or that is also dreaming of a life of a pure love without issues and this and that, where somehow every gesture is sensual in it.
Right.
So there is a navigation in the story. So it's not that Mirabai then grabbed Krishna and then had a literal relationship.
Yes.
What
Right.
she did was spiritualize her life by seeing that there was a love affair. And that in those who perceived you in that love affair also were touched by it. So now those who also, so then those you are caring for, who perceive you in that energy, then they also see when the energy is, you're seeing all the features of that energy, absences, a kind of almost spiritualizing it in the absence, where the presence there may be an argument over something. Okay, so you see that the absence and presence have elements of the same thing. The absence needs a presence, but not in neediness. Even though it appears to be neediness, it's still in what you're creating. Need gives you an insight.
Yeah. So where's that line between neediness and missing?
The line is waiting in the, it doesn't have to materialize for it. In fact, that it imagines it, that it is giving you, that the energy somehow says, let's hook up with Kai because she has a real dynamic that's happening of all the forces at play, the literal force, the evocative force, the quest for love, where people may be afraid of her genuineness at a certain point, but her genuineness opens the door. Holy shit, do you want such a, and then you jump into that story. And then they say, well, people will be attached to her genuineness, but then if she's in a literal story where you have to do this, so you can see the challenges that will come to you as you're learning how to navigate, but that there is in you a quest for a full human experience. And somehow, in what you reveal, there is the person who agrees to it will have a broken heart. There's a broken heart inherent in it, in memory and loss and possessive. It has all elements of broken heart. But if it goes to the depth of the broken heart, then it resembles like a Jesus saying, "Father, forgive them," or where you see like he's so removed from what's happening to him that he's still having a spiritual conversation with the energy while all these people are kicking the shit out of him and doing this to him. You understand? So you're having a conversation, and whether there's a capacity, you see some will say, well, that little rat, and some will say she was a saint. All of those elements are in a story with you. But missing is also in the story. And so I think that whatever the literal story becomes, and it must, it seems, be written in it. Because why? I say because when something that was evocative becomes literalized, then when you hear it from the literal perspective, it doesn't have the grace in it. No one can say, I fell so deeply in love and we schmucked out and we created the whole thing. And okay. And as we're ending, it's like the tree leaves leaving and stuff like that. It's inherently in the form. Who can be there for but that is what is happening. So the people have to do what the people karmically do, because there is a great fear of having the experience. There's still a possessive in the life. But at the same time, in your doing nothing is an invitation. You've created an expression that comes out of that. But you also understand that people will miss, there will be missing, different levels of missing. And that's what I was kidding around saying that story about the rabbis when they say the guy wouldn't let her get remarried while he got remarried.
Yeah.
Because of a get, and they explained it. The poor guy is still thinking. So I saw, even though it was a violation of American rights,
Yeah.
I did understand the missing part, you know. And so then when you hear of the loss of someone that was close to you, the missing then comes in for a moment, and you see the whole. You see it not from the possessive, but you get a glimpse of something when someone passed, and you reflect on a conversation you may have had or something. So let's say that we are then exploring these dimensions, and in exploring that, you see that somehow the choices that we made, anyone could have told you, don't do it, don't do it, just for the DNA test or something, you know? Don't do it. And they say, why not? And they say, because it's a broken heart, but you'll get babies.
They make up for the broken heart.
And I say, are you telling me that you didn't know all this was going to happen then? And they say, are you telling me that somehow? And I say, you know, I kind of did know it was going to happen. So in the society, it's a flaw, or it's a this, or it's a that. But you see that you have a relationship with a feeling. And I feel that now there are different elements again of the memory, but when the memory is around, the broken heart enters into the memory. When you see that deeply, you see then the relationship was only around that experience. And I say it can only be genuine when you have the experience of it in retrospect, in the broken heart. You then see a genuineness, and that there's been a thread running through your life that has a relationship to a genuineness in the world. And so when something is too phony or too motive oriented, somehow you lose interest in it or it falls away. What do you say, Urja?
Yeah.
There's a very weird show that they were watching last night. What was that? Inside Nine? I think it was called Inside Nine.
It's pretty good.
And it's these English guys, I think, that just invented a series of weird, made up shows, 20-minute shows or something like that. With a few, I think they have about 5 or 6 regular actors, and there's, I think it's English or German or English or whatever. These guys are very weird. Some are so bad, and some are really funny. You know, so you'll see what you think of it if you can get it on somewhere. I don't know what it's on. I think it's called Inside Nine, and it was reviewed
Inside
by
9, the number 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is anyone else on, or is just the 4 of us? Yeah.
Well, Magic Sufi, Sophia, and Britt have said hi on YouTube.
Okay, hi everyone. I hope this makes some sort of sense. That we're talking about having shared in a friendship. We also got to see the theater of our lives. You know, and so where what was thought of as what was that noise just then?
I don't know. Did it come from mine? I don't know.
So, okay. I don't know either, but as we explore that, we start to see that feelings that we would run from and missing, you see that that most of the relationships in retrospect, the intention of the relationship was the broken heart. And somehow they said, well, the person, you couldn't stop them from the experience no matter what. The people were so committed to the experience that it was almost as if a drug addict had to keep on using no matter what you said to them, please stop, or this or that. You see that there was an imperative in the circumstance towards an experience. And even in the use of the drugs, you see that the rationale for the continued, that there was an experience waiting in the wings. So what was also a flaw in the world was also a creative happening in some weird way in a parallel world. And that usually was a world that was kept hidden while one had a front of a literal thing going on, or a literal world going on, that they had to maintain a literal world while they had this private world that they shared maybe with some people who were in the same circumstance. That their ability to manage a literal world meant that they had this kind of what had to be sneaky private world. And if the sneakiness of it was because it wasn't in tune with the literal continuity of one's identity and circumstance, so it was invalidated. But then if you visited those places, you saw they were authentic places. And an authentic thing was happening. But that the accessing of the duality, the very duality is hidden from the person in some way that's apparent to anyone viewing it. But the person viewing it may have power, they want to treat it.
Yeah.
But you also see the capacity to live a false life outwardly by the use of having a sneaky little life was brilliantly executed.
All right. And so they're treating the wrong aspect.
That's their interest again, is continuity in the form.
Right.
Our interest that we become then is to see the theater of the life being lived, the authenticity of the life being this. So then what was a flaw in the person becomes also brilliant. That they found a way to navigate to a form. So it's again like being a slave while you're a human. That somehow events put you into a form of slavery and you have to hide your humanity and act as if you're brutal, or act as if you're a cold-hearted killer, or act as if, so then you have to act with premise of defending yourself. But again, you understood an intimacy in a circumstance, the humanhood would emerge again. But then you would find yourself more and more in circumstances where being a human, not theoretically was one thing, but being a human was a flaw in the system that you were in.
Yeah.
And you had to learn this, and you had to learn that, and you had to learn this. But then there would be a moment when you saw that the learning was false. It was an attempt to organize your being, organize your behavior in a way. So somehow you found out that there was something like attraction that made connections. And that there was an honesty in that attraction and the relationships that came out of that. And it was a kind of honesty, not brutal honesty, but a kind of honesty of association or friendship.
Right. Yeah.
That didn't exactly tell the truth and didn't lie either. But it created a creative atmosphere of seeing. Where the seeing was no longer controlled by a duality, but the seeing came more out of a creative environment. And so then you saw that the seeing, you saw what was the relationship to Krishna then with Mirabai. And they said, no, it wasn't literally a marriage. It was a boyfriend. And then there was also in that movie, I think of Saint Teresa or Therese or something, where the young nuns treated Jesus like a boyfriend. And he was jealous of
Get a ring. Get a-
okay. So they made it into their own life, but somehow they internalized a natural experience, that there wasn't a contradiction in the person and in the God, the spirituality, and that the spirituality was this attempt to somehow be true to some poetry in one's life.
Rich said, so are these
So then I
other,
say the missing is the first aspect of missing is to get you to act, because it's seen as a flaw. But as it's not a question of waiting, it is a question of creatively knowing. Now this thing says, do I want something to do with Skype? Allow, what should I do? Deny?
is somebody trying to call you on Skype?
I got rid of it with deny.
Okay.
Maybe someone is calling on Skype then, huh? Yeah, here it came back again. So shall we call them or something? Skype wants to sign using key Apple ID authentication.
Yeah, usually Skype is accompanied by sound, a ring or some sort of ringtone.
Yeah, it's got a
Once you
shopping
want-
bag next to it.
They verify your identity like that.
Yeah, that might
Yeah,
not
that's
be.
my password.
I forget the password and I have to do it.
I don't know the password. I'm keeping myself kind of creatively dumb so I don't have to be pursued so much from these companies. So the situation, what do you think?
I call Tico whenever that happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't open your computer if you don't use your password or.
Mary does it.
We have the book of passwords here. There's Janet's been working out in the garden a lot here. Everybody's been working out in the garden a lot.
Oh, Danny,
Yes.
I sent Janet, it's a recipe for a spot on the face using vinegar and eggplant. So I sent her the whole article. It seems easy to make, the tincture.
I have one of those. Can you
And the
send-
guy says it really comes off if you keep doing it.
Okay. I just had well, we'll see. That they say sometimes it depends on if it gets a scab on it or not or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think so far we've been okay with these things that are just self-treating. What do you think? But you haven't seen anything major happening, is it, for you, Ursha?
Well, sometimes it feels major and then.
But I
after-
mean, you still from the director's chair can see all the elements now of the situation, the literal elements, the evocative. You could see the poetry, the kidding around, the story that you're in. But you could also see that if in fact death is not death, it's for us releasing, surrendering the story. I think I learned that then from my father. It took a while to learn that they approached not eating as a way of letting go, that somehow there was a you that released the story perceptively, and then the body had its lag time. So in that, they felt that what they're trying to do with rules now and laws, assisted dying or whatever, we're not talking about assisted dying. We're talking about kind of having the relationship to the creative dimension in the story. And that's actually what it is that you are literally there as long as it is speaking to you in that way. So it's usually associated with great pain, where the story is no longer speaking to you, obviously, where you let it go with a certain degree of pain. And you see that with some degree of pain, you're letting it go.
Yes.
Not let go. but it's a process of letting go.
You can't order it. You just have to accept the process.
Unless you have some real creative plans, then you can probably order it a little bit. But if in fact you don't really have that many, you only have like a month of movies to see or something like that, or phone calls. So then you say, okay, we have a month, and then in another month I'll see what's happening.
Yeah.
But you're not making a demand on any of it at this point in time. So you see that there is a life inherently in the form that you're caring for.
Yes. And I've
And
learned.
as you learn to care for it, not as a Christian charity worker, but as a lover, where your body then becomes a lover to you.
Yeah.
Do you understand? And so it would be just like your kid having arthritis in the neck. It would be more than you having arthritis in the neck. So you would see how easy you would kiss the neck and do all that. You understand? Where you would feel like a real schmuck doing that to yourself. It's not only the literal doing it to yourself. You may literally do that to yourself, but it is in fact the feeling that this lover has, the lover you're looking for, has also accompanied you throughout this whole journey. So I wouldn't want to, relegate our life to feel-goodism, because it's been an intense life.
Yes.
And you worked hard to feel bad too. So you really worked overtime sometimes, where they say, stop, you don't have to, but you somehow had to visit that place.
Yeah, I catch myself sometimes, like I could see I'm going into something, but in a drama. And I say, no drama.
No, you have a relationship with the broken heart is in fact seeing it from the other side of the mirror into the story. And you see from the other side of the mirror is pure affection, but it's not the history. So from the other side of the mirror, all the authors, everyone has attempted to do, they've made death the premise of that, but it is somehow no longer an attachment to a certain form.
Oh, yeah.
So you see the life.
Yeah.
And as you see the life, it's living in its own way.
Yes.
Now I said to myself, if I'm going to try to make it live another 10 years, it says, my neck says, I don't want to live another 10 years. I don't want to take any juice on that shit. So then I start to find out that there are disagreements. And my liver may say, no, man, I've given enough all this time. And you didn't look out for me. Now I'm not going to do 10 more years with this shit. Stop making your plans. So if the body says to you, look, start making your plans. So now the neck says to you, I don't want to try another trip now about what you're going to do about me. I'm ready to give up this story. Not just, and you say what? Would you convince it to hang around? If the neck wants to go.
Well, it's like right now I'm in a situation where you have only one arm and one hand. It's amazing how it's.
Well, you don't have that much to do anyway. So if I look around the house, you don't need that arm and hand actually, because you can do most of it with one hand pretty well.
Try to put your clothes on with one.
Yeah, I know, you have to jump into them. But can't you do those clubs?
No, right now I can't. No, I still do some those exercises like that. I do that because I can.
It's more that the club has a wrist movement.
Yes.
That
when it's over.
But another thing that I would also do, and I do sometimes, is there's something called ASL, American Sign Language, and there's some books on it and online. But the American Sign Language then has you kind of doing whole movements. When you're just, like if I say the trees were moving like that, you can actually say the trees are moving like that with your own movements, and there's a shared, but there's some nice movements in there from the relaxed body you know. But I would also try the Bates movement where the eyes are exposed to the daylight
I do
movement.
that.
Not as wishful thinking, you know, but so much like you're regulating the clock somehow. And so where the body kind of make sure that you don't have tension in the body. Because when you have the neck pain, there's also other aspects of the body that it tense up to,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So there's a collaborative going on.
Yeah.
When certain parts of the body start to surrender, and that's why the shoulder blades, when they're not moving, then
Yeah.
the head starts falling more, and you know. So somehow the exercise that you had there for the shoulder blades of bringing the
Yeah.
elbows together, make sure that that is moving. So all of that, you know, becomes natural to us now. You know, somehow there's this bringing the elbows together. That's the
This one.
what do you
Yes.
think? So that
Yeah.
it makes, because they say when your shoulder blades are open, then you get another 6 inches and you stretch by that. But I've just been doing. I don't know how well it is, but it seems right with the clubs and then the vibration and the clubs also. But the eye movements and the smell and all of that outdoors. There. And then I've been doing it with the shadow. So it's become a kind of shadow dancing, shadow movement.
You dance with your shadow.
Maybe Mary will take a picture one day of the shadow. Well, it's the movements itself that I can't believe that I just did that. You know, when I come back in the morning, it was like a real something I couldn't have imagined. And then it kind of opens up, palming with my eyes and the sun and moving with the sun and absence of sun, hearing sounds and then following that and my body moving with it, you know. So for that period of time, it's pretty nice. And then I started walking around doing it. One fellow said that it's probably good to walk around on off-trail stuff
Yes.
where you have to keep your balance, you know. So I'm just doing naturally what's happening, not extending it further than that. What do you think? And I'm still doing the 16 hours overnight fasting, which I feel is the main thing. You know, the overnight fasting like that, where the body just kind of heals itself or relaxes itself, where it doesn't think that doing is the whole thing. So I feel to some degree with the 16-hour overnight fast, the body becomes more sensual.
Yeah.
Hmm? And you see then also in the social fabric, the addictive element of love, where the central element of love is coming from a different place. It's not a possessive. The addictive element comes from a possessive. So it has more element of sexual as a possessive, where the sensual is kind of more based on a true feeling. So the true feeling doesn't own the relationship, so doesn't fear absence or presence or whatever. Its relationship is to a true energy that's running through the feeling.
Would that
So
mean
I
there
feel
is
that
no
most of us who've met or what looks like relationships that give you a broken heart, to me in retrospect, are seeing a genuineness in the relationship, because any psychotherapist could have advised you not to do this thing or don't do this thing. I tried that. So you understand, and they were correct if you wanted a normal life, an okay life or whatever. But if in fact it was a soulful existence for you, then you see that even the absence of the literal relationship has soulfulness in it. And you see that the soulfulness is reached through the broken heart. And what is the broken heart? The deepest broken heart is that you threw it away. While you had it, you threw it away. You know, not the psychological, all of those are elements of it. You said the wrong thing, you did this, but you say, no, you relentlessly So then in the memory of it, you experience, first there's a guilt passage to protect the way, but when the reflection is deeper than that, and it's, you see that the true punishment is not you being punished. The you surrenders. There is a force enough for the you to be pushed aside. And you see that there is just a broken heart in the story. But you also understand that the broken heart has been following the story from the beginning. From the perspective creatively of living a full life, when you say, why wouldn't these people therapeutically avoid the broken heart or avoid this or that? And I say the literalness of continuity has something, therapeutically, it's wrong what the person is going through. But you also understand that the elements of what they're going through is not exactly crazy. There is also seemingly, at the same time that we're just people living a life, in retrospect, you see how meaningful that life was. And it does seem then over nothing. But it does seem then at one point that it's revealed to you to have lived, not the style, not the loss, not the this, but to have lived the whole life in whatever circumstance you jumped into the story. And there is a point when you ask yourself then, consciously coming into the story as a conscious being, if your life was an elective, you say, Urja, would you like to do Urja again? Not to change it or anything, but you can grow up in Paris and you can do this, but you come from this Urja now. You still think you're going to mess up the story if you're too smart? You're going to change the story or tell your father off? So you see that somehow there was a meaning in avoidance. Somehow the continuity was instinctively the main thrust.
Yeah.
So there would be moments when you would have to say, what the? And so you see that what the is almost a perceptive moment of something, that you're in a continuity. So then you start to see maybe the people in it planning to get out of it. As they perceive that they want a life of their own or this or that. I feel that energy is not, we'll say, just kids growing up with you and then wanting a life of their own and your love maybe being oppressive or something. But you see that there's something in you that wants a life of its own. So when it manifests in a child, it's something in you that's kind of manifesting. All I'm saying is that the perceptions from different perspectives on the life take away your ownership. And they reveal a world where the measure of you is not only the literal identity you, but a life lived. And with some degree of consciousness in it is what one is fought to maintain or care for. So let's say you see how you're managing it. How does it look then? Have you managed some degree of respect in a situation? Kai?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
there is somehow something of a shared experience?
Yeah, and it's getting better every day. So something's shifting.
Well, the perceptive of it humanizes it. So then it doesn't, then it says that you shared a loving feeling. You no longer have ownership in the literal story that way. You've brought about what you needed to do, train you. What you need to have is some humanity now around caring for the kids in some way.
Mhm.
It's not spelled out, but what is spelled out is that they're not a possessive. Nobody owns them. And I think now they're hip enough that no one's going to own them anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? So I feel that somehow, whatever they say, get the vaccine, don't get it, I'll go here, I'll go there. You see that they're becoming free people. Hmm?
Yes.
And the free people means that their love for you is not rules bound, is that it's a shared feeling. And so you're sharing a feeling, but it's not rules. They're free to fall in love. They're free to have a life. They're free to do this. And somehow you've been getting that ingredient, that agreement in the situation you're in. And somehow you come close to being treated like a piece of shit.
Oh, yes, I have.
Okay.
I think I've come closer than close. I've been.
Yeah, no, I understand. So that is usually a sign of, so then that's like Jai's landlord. Okay, where you get along this and that. All of a sudden, the guy kills a couple of squirrels outside your window, and then
Yeah.
you understand the language he's speaking in some way. What do you say, Ursula? Do you have anything further? I hope. Is there anything from the folks who are not on? I hope it makes some sense what I'm saying here.
Britt had said earlier, she said, so are these other / secret lives an attempt for one to live their true selves?
Let's say the true self is managing it anyway and is leaving you, the complex person, is leaving you to deal with all the aspects of yourself. So there is inherent true self, which is not a self. There's a force. So I would say it's hidden in the broken heart. But one is born protecting it. So I think that almost as if it resembles a pregnancy. Somehow there's something deeper than you happening inside of you, and then there's you.
Yeah.
So then you live a life, but this feeling inside of you is also very much a part of what is going on. And to some degree, I think you meet it, not in the planned broken heart. It seems that many of our choices have a hidden broken heart in them. And in fact, the more genuine they are, the more it will send you to that place. And somehow the absence will send you pretty close to that neighborhood where you discover dimensions of your being. And you can translate some of this discovery into the literal life that you're living. But then to see it completely is to then have a life with the energy itself. So it resembles a creative life. You see that somehow the movie is deeper than the regular people because the whole story is there. You can see it from the audience. And so in order to play one of the characters in a movie, you would have to put your heart in it in such a naive way that you get a glimpse of your own life. And I say, as you get a glimpse, you re-enter the story from a different place. I feel, whereas not as survival driven, but survival is only an aspect of the story. It's more that you see your life is in fact a journey, a creative one. To some extent, your life resembles an artwork in retrospect of how all the accidents that you've had all fit together somehow in a grid. You see a remarkable literalness in the accidents and the mistakes that you've made. And you see there was mistakes that also led to some other happenings. So you discover your own journey. And as you discover your own journey, there is a sort of surrender of ownership to some degree. You see that you're caring for something and that your life deeply is that at the same time that you are surviving, it's not at the expense of the grace in your being. Somehow you have been doing that juggling act. And now you see that that's becoming part of the fabric, political fabric of the moment with Me Too and other forces like that, where there is being treated like a piece of crap or not seen. So there's increased demand for the humanity to be perceived as being part of the story, whether you're a worker, whether you're a woman, whether you're married, whether you're this, whatever storyline you're in, you understand that the storyline becomes the reality and the people then start to become diminished. So those are political persuasions that reveal a happening. I don't know that to literalize it, you see that there is a creative upheaval happening. And that at the same time that it's attempted to be owned or literalized, you see that at its essence, it's a soulful journey. So in that state, even the so-called mistakes of our lives are in fact aspects of a journey that introduces you to something else. Let's say a mistake in playing something on an instrument may open up a new way of looking at it. So the life itself becomes a creative act. Not that you are doing something creative as an ownership, but you, the identity is part of the creative expression, not the owner of the story. Does that make any sense at all to you, Derek?
Yeah.
Okay, but then you go out, or you have to pay rent, or you have to do this, and if you're in San Francisco, it seems like you have to do this. It's not that I'll casually walk over and pay the rent, or I'll do it next week instead, or something, but that somehow you do this, or they'll do that to you.
For sure.
Hmm?
Yeah.
So somehow inherent in the circumstance is its own ending while it's continuing. And let's say you may get sick, this may happen, they may charge money, you may move on. So you see that flux is inherently in the story. At the same time, it has the appearance of continuity. And it's not contradictory in some sense. Because you see that this is happening in life. That it's a fall away or a lifetime away. But the awayness is thought of as death, but it's unknown, the unknown. Meaning the baggage of self, of continuity, seemingly doesn't exist in this other thing. So we can see the dialogue in the moment between living and dying being creative acts. And that somehow it's the knowledge of dying that is allowing one to live. The fear of dying creates something else. It's not to have fear, but when fear comes, it's a form, it feels like an inflammation. Whenever there is an inflammation in some case, where you're covering up too much or you're hiding something too much, but you know is waiting for you, there's also an inflammation of thought that may then transfer from what I've experienced to the body. That there is a kind of, there is a floating inflammation that then becomes causal with infection, with hurt, but with thought or pressure or whatever. But one's body is giving them signals of a happening. Now, the others may claim it to be a medical happening, but I think throughout our life we get signals of dying and living as being part of what's happening in our life. And that when they want to get you the flu shots as a kid or get these shots, they're afraid of you dying. So there's a premise of your continuing living. But the person who's overseeing you is always having a concern about dying coming into the picture. So let's say this becomes a common conversation without ever perceiving it until an event happens that forces us to see something that has been remarkably juggled all along. So that's why I'm saying when the loss of ownership of the life, where there's a looking back at the story, you see this remarkable creative act that has taken place. And that somehow you had to be left out of the story. And you find out what almost everyone else may have known. But discovery, that's why I use, all the neighbors may have known my mother as a woman who happened to be a mother. But again, I have a mother who happens to be a woman. If I discover her womanness, it comes as a shock to the system. So what everyone knew is different than in discovery. Discovery opens up a whole other field. And so that once you start to see that there has been a parallel life all along while you've lived, and you access it in memory when there's a kind of purity to you. The memory reveals a moment. Now, usually one may use memory therapeutically as a way to carry on. But if in fact you do not see that the recurring memory to be such a flaw, you see the recurring memory is also reflective, where it doesn't have time and space. And that memory is no longer a possessive of yours. So it's no longer a therapeutic ownership of the memory. You see there is a doorway through memory, but somehow it requires a purity from you. Because without that, you would fear that form of memory. Without that, you would look the other way or possessive. But to explore the life you've lived requires something of a death experience of the life you have lived. To be able to get a peep into actually what took place. So I think that through the approaches that we use spiritually or health-wise, there is an attempt to be or to care for this quality in ourselves. And so as you do that, you become aware of the remarkable system, your own immune system, your own body's, where you, obviously your idea of ownership is absurd when you see how remarkable the body has been working, keeping it together. And I think when you see it to some degree, you fall in love with it in a way that is not ownership, but is kind of care for it.
Mm.
So most of the New Age things that are happening out there are a form of attempting to care for it, but it becomes commercialized again, in a way. But some of the ingredients are intuitive for us, and that is to try to keep it as natural as possible and not to impose a condition somehow, further condition on the body. So I think then that one becomes aware of the body in that way, it's like the body becomes a lover. And so then I think the stuff you would put on or take for it or whatever is what you would give a lover, a gift you would give. So I understand how Meshuggah that may sound, that somehow you discover you've had a lover all along.
Mm. Mm.
But you will discover it only when you lose it.
Mm.
And then when you lose it, you have to be kind to it.
Mm.
Hmm? So you discover a different kind of kindness. It is not the fake kindness, but it is kindness in actuality. Hmm? And when you then give it a voice, you see the dimensions that you're in a circumstance. So that felt okay. I just realized that deeply myself what's happening to some degree. Was there anything, Derek? How are you doing? Let me see. How does this all sound to you?
You know, it's fascinating
I
to watch
spoke-
everything unfold.
I spoke to John, not John Bolera, but John DiRobertis yesterday.
Oh yeah, I spoke with him on Sunday night
Yeah.
to see how he's doing.
So it seemed okay then. Huh?
Seems okay.
But as I was saying, that in some cases, when the relationship break over what seems like a stupid thing, and the premise of the relationship is to be there, and the very thing that we're discussing, there is a kind of being there for that actually perceptively happening in the person. So there is a kind of agreement that comes just as it does with your parents or something like that as a kid, that they'll be there for you at certain moments, that's instinctively understood. There is also something in the relationships that we share, the sadhana that we share, of a being there. And it's not spelled out in a contract what the being is there for, because it's not literalized. It's just inherently part of having shared that feeling. And in fact, when that isn't shared in that way, there is a loss that the person feels of trust. It's a very remarkable dimension to explore. Because in the literal world, that may be seen as silly, but in the poetic world, you see the meaning of something is not a psychological loss. But in the loss of that connection, there's also a loss with some aspect in your own body. So somehow the loss of that person is still in memory. And you see that your life then is filed in memory. And then some experience sets it off or awakens it or reflects on it. But then you also see that dimensions of memory in the sadhana or in the journey are like writing a novel or creating something. You see the memory, when you write in the memory in the book, you're trying to be as truthful as possible, not legally truthful as possible, but basically you see the whole story. And then you see a story that was hidden from you. You could see you from different aspects of the story that you were in. How you appeared to your mother, how you appeared to your father, what was happening for them when they looked at you and they saw you and they were going on in their own life. And they were, so then you start to see, holy shit. The complexity, the depth of it, the moviness of it, while it looked like a simple thing that was unfolding. And so that's what I think the stage or the movie did show. It showed how deep a life was in 2 hours.
Mm.
And there's only moments that you can see how deep this life has been. Because the attachment to it can't see it, it's in it. But the creative relationship to it is somehow it's in it, but not of it. You're in the deeper moments of it. And yet we're people. So just being regular people, there are regular things that will, like you say, rent money or this or that, where it's up in the air to some extent. And yet at the same time, you're keeping a civilized place. Is there any other questions from anyone out there? No? Or, thanks for, but again, this question of missing as an
Yeah,
energy in itself, as a place itself. Once it's awakened, it exists. And it's existing in many ways. And some of it you'll see that a range of things may happen in missing. You say, oh, this happened, and there's a kind of generosity of heart that may come in seeing the missing, or how you were blind to something that was happening. But then you also see that some of the missing was to set yourself up for a broken heart. That you had to look the other way for the story to continue to reach a heat enough to reach you. And once it reaches you, it becomes part of the fabric of your life. So in that, we can then look into the story that we're in, and you can see all the elements of the broken heart inherent in the story. And so you see that there was a true love that ran through the story, and but it's not being released from being a possessive. There is a period of hurt because the feeling is still there. And so what happens is the person protects themselves against that feeling.
Right.
So let's say in relationship, or even though it seems a simple thing that can be psychologically managed, you see that it goes deeper than that in its absence and its loss, depending on how deep the loss was. But you see then, and you're kind of intuitive now, that you have a relationship with a hurt and that you're navigating that. But the hurt is not a possessive. The hurt is, in fact, there was something true shared. And it's truly being shared with the children. So it's requiring people to be human. Well, they want to do Trump, or they want to do this, and they want to do that. They want to find an identity so they can be schmucky as possible. You understand that there was a true affection that happened in the relationship, and that the history was not so dominant in the story. You were able to create your thing. Okay. I'd like to explore this question of missing now for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to bring something up, like from other people's teachings, that would say neediness. Obviously, if you're in a state of neediness, you're not attracting a true relationship because you're coming from a state of need. But what is the distinguishing factor between neediness and missing, or deep longing, or pure feeling?
Let's say you recognize that the same factors that run in your literal life are also running in your creative life. So the questions that come to you, raised by your own perceptive moment, and you say neediness, and I say, well, need to eat. If I didn't eat at that time or that day, then I'll figure out to get something to eat because there is somehow a need to eat that I'm managing. So I don't have to think so much about the food being a need because it's still around, I have it there or whatever. But if starving was there, or we were so strung out, broke, that we can only eat once a week or something like that, you would see a neediness, but it would be around management because the neediness is there in the body. It's not made up. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't think of it as neediness with your body like you're doing a favor to your body. You would see that your body and you are in one movement. So if your body needed to eat because something happened to you, you put aside eating in order to do something else, then you see that you would have to get back and take care of it. So it's written into the story. So let's say we see neediness to some extent like that,
Mhm.
where it's not only a psychological state, but the psyche is measuring what's happening in your body. And it's telling you, look, you didn't eat for 2 days, you should have something. So the psyche is working with your body. And it says, and the psyche says, look, I need the energy from the food for the body. And if it doesn't come over a period of time, then I can't function. And we can't. So you have that logical conversation like this. It's an instant conversation, but that's what it's saying.
Mhm.
So you see that neediness for most of the forms is reflecting a true thing that's happening. And you also start to see that in other forms that's happening. If a feeling of neediness is happening, it's because a kind of neediness is happening. And you're picking up on something. And you may be in the circumstance that you're in. You see for some things that there needs to be, you see the avoidance of the conversation is too much. So there needs to be some, so you start to see creatively that you're not alone in the circumstances. There has to be some agreement. And when that agreement isn't there, then the aloneness that you're in is so that you're feeling. So you see there is a need then for communication, even though you see the systems of avoidance. But if you were hungry enough, you wouldn't give a crap so much about the system. You would say, hey, we're hungry, we can't starve to death. So you see that there's a larger priority that would come. So let's take away, first of all, the neediness from being some characteristic that has to be gotten rid of. It may need to be if it extends itself. But let's say the neediness is a symptomatic of a happening.
Mhm.
And it's like Derek saying, okay, you're living, there's a kind of sweetness happening in your life, but this rent is due tomorrow. So you see a neediness would come into the story while you're living a lie. You would understand that there's a moment waiting for you tomorrow, or a situation where you would try to go out and cover it today or so. So let's say that you are managing that. And as it gets close to the day of paying the rent, a kind of neediness factor opens up. But you see, it's a neediness as an alarm signal about the situation you're in. What do you say? So then you see in the pain that you feel in the body, that while you were living the life, you neglected, there's a meeting with the body that's inherently there, and pain is its device. But somehow, there is a meeting with one's own body where it's not a possessive, but it is in fact like a lover who is sick. So let's say the pain that you're having is perceived as a lover who is having the pain. And you see a kind of neglect of seeing that. You rerouted the system if you perceive the body perceptively as your lover. But you see how naturally it has been to have a lover, when you had a lover, to care for them.
Mhm.
And if they got hurt, you would care for them more than you would care for yourself. So you see those elements are running through the life. So I would say that the forms of neediness, before it becomes psychologically addictive, if we're talking about addiction, but if we're talking about neediness, you're seeing, you're shedding light on something. You're not getting rid of the neediness. The neediness is a symptomatic of something that's actually happening. If you felt it there in food, it would speak to you clearly. You're not getting enough of this, you're not getting of that. And so you see It may be so painful at a certain point, you may get so sick or so, that there's a neediness, but it's not neediness as we know it.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about neediness, we're talking about an internal fear that needs to be relaxed, that needs to be persuaded to be quiet when it has something to say.
Mm.
So then you may also see you experiencing something that you couldn't experience for your parents when they were going through it. They were like bothersome people going through whatever trip they were going through, but you couldn't see the neediness in them, the need for that if they were in an inauthentic situation and they still had to carry around, there was a need to be, they had to be sneaks about feelings that they were going through.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So when that is the basis of most addictions out there, is that you then create a community of sneakiness. But the very thing that you were longing for happens to be a human trait, but it interferes with the circumstance you're in. So let's say if the feeling starts to fall away in the circumstance you're in, and there's still a need in both of the people for some relationships that come only with grace, then you see that the person would have to sneakily try to create relationships that have that in it, because it would interfere with the status quo. So you see the different grids that you're in. In some extent, you're an authentic person, and the grid that you're in is because you're really into it, because it does speak to you, and you're true. But then you also see, in order for most people to maintain the status quo, the continuity or the survival aspect, then the feelings have to take a lie. It starts to become a lie in some way. So let's say the circumstance is always changing that one is in. And it looks like because of this or because of that, but it's not. It's when the feeling shifted, the form starts to shift. So then it needs, it's being forced to have something that it resists. And that is a hey baby conversation. And they say, you come, we'll say in a circumstance, I don't want to literalize it for anyone, but you come to say, hey baby, what's best for the kids?
Mm-hmm.
And you see, then you shifted your affection over to something else.
Right.
So now each person is free to have a life, but you have both considered in your life what's best for the kid. So if you then say, which you'll do anyway, but let's say there's an agreement, I'll hang with this. And the kids say, well, I don't want to do that. And they say, okay, well, what do you want? They say, well, we want vacations from you guys too, also at times. So let's say we have an impossible conversation. Now that conversation is in there, whether it happens 50 years from now or 20 years from now or 20 minutes from now, where it is not your viewpoint of what's best for the kids, but the kids also, because it'll be like my immune system says, yeah, you didn't consult me when you got there.
Right.
They'll say, why didn't you ask us what we like?
Right.
And they may say, well, we can visit Jai and go to the ocean, and then we can go out there, and then we can come back and tell Pop, don't worry about the bullshit or anything, do your thing. And, the kids say. And while I'm out there, I wouldn't mind visiting Stanford, he says, and see what it looks like on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So just a quarter, it's only that far away. Do you understand? But impossible at the same time. But let's say that somehow you are in this interaction And in meeting the children in different situations there, we are having that conversation where they are included. So it is not so much everyone doing something for them, but the them also have a voice to some degree.
Right.
And you see when they have a voice how hip they are. You understand, they make everyone else sound lame and what they'd like to try or do. You know? Okay. So it seems to me that the conversation is inherently in the form. If you look at throughout history, you see that it's all missing a heartfelt conversation. Then you see that it's avoided in order to maintain the continuity. But if in fact the community said, hey, is this right? Should we do a rich poor thing? Should we do this? You know, how best to approach? You know. So you see then even if you during the Trump years, you say, hey man, what's really happening here? I don't get it. Well, something so civilized has to be so stupid sounding. What's up? And you see then that it's running away from the very conversation. But it's working towards the broken heart is the basis of an honest conversation. Because the psyche is driven to continue. So the history is driven to continue. And the history includes ourselves and our nature and our circumstance. But some event interrupts the continuity and requires soul searching. When soul searching takes place, one re-enters the story from a different place. You're finding a lot of these soldiers here that are now, I was reading, taking the magic mushrooms, the mushrooms, and they're finding, you know, what they experienced and how they were stuck in the experience years later.
Mm.
You know, and what they were stuck in the memory of the experience, not as literal memory, but memory that would pop up when you heard a bus noise or a motorcycle went past or something like that, you know. So it then sent into the system. But the one thing you found out in the system is that you surrendered your humanity towards bullshit.
Right.
That the closer you got to the ground, the more you removed from what was really happening. And the people who knew what was really happening, they were back in Fifth Avenue or they were back in wherever the hell they were. They were not involved in the literal situation. So then you felt yourself as a piece of shit. And so then when you re-entered the story, that memory re-entered the story with you. And the memory not being literally your memory, but being in your body, being in your brain. So then, to then have a reflective sense and see where you've been trained to dehumanize yourself. And so the fear is being human.
Yeah.
So I feel that much of that is running through the story, and you're meeting people who are hurt.
Yeah.
And the hurt is in fact intelligent, it is not stupid. The hurt is in fact a sign of their being healthy, that they still want a life, they still want a love, they still want authenticity. So it seems like the only choice is a kind of not genuine being, that you surrender being a genuine human being in order to survive. So I think that the neediness that you'll experience out there in yourself or in others is also the people you're caring for. There is a neediness running through the story. And when you're caring for people who are in that neediness or have different physical effects of that neediness, you'll start to see that that element exists in you. It's reflective.
Mm-hmm.
And that you're having a shared experience with folks. and you see your own negotiations. But what happens is that you've created a presence in the circumstance that you're in that is now in the circumstance. Just like when we were kidding around with Jai and the landlord, we created us with the landlord. So Jai with the landlord is one thing. The landlord can do landlord and Jai can do Jai, but us in the room with the landlord and Jai.
Mm.
So we created an us in the room in some weird way, where at least you have to pretend to come from a human place. Hmm? So that is the trick of the form, that has entered into the story now also, where we could say, come on, man, don't be so creepy about it. Mhm. So I think that you can, to some degree, that has happened, where one can see when if it's leaning too far. But again, it's not to say that we don't have our own penchant for a broken heart. So you say maybe with Jai kidding around, no matter what I did or no matter what we did, she would still find a way to have a fight with the landlord. Going back 70 years to Brooklyn or something, when having a fight with the landlord was normal. Okay. And even though Oprah lives on that part of the town and all these saints live right down the street, you got a landlord that's still on your case that's not supposed to be there. Why don't you just say, Oprah, talk to my landlord for me? So it's, or whoever is there, I don't even know who's there, or put the guy on TV, a picture of him on TV killing the squirrels.
Oh God.
You could put that on the Ellen show or something like that.
Right.
Okay. So it seems to me that just like that, but not just like that. So somehow Jai represents an energy in the situation, in the circle that she's in. And somehow there's a hurt with the landlord. And so there are other factors that are taking place. Now that's what I say in Missing, when we said the other day everyone wanted to call the other John because maybe he was hurt or got pissed off or something. And I say, there's one sense where you'd like to see that they're okay, but another sense that you understand that somehow the person covered themselves in the sense, that made you the villain of something that was happening in a way that the missing then. So you kind of wait for a missing, not as some kind of psychological state, but you see the missing then sees the story from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about I miss you, baby, that can take away 20 years of hurt and bother and all that.
Yeah.
But somehow the thing has to be true. And it's not laid out in any of us what that means, but somehow when you hear it, there's no doubt about it. So the second stage or the third stage of us meeting again in that world after a crisis or after a break like that is that it then comes from a different place, not part of the continuity any longer. So that means, as I said to some, what you wanted from me, I want from you then, because the next place has some very great challenges in store for us. Not as a fearful thing, but in fact worth hanging out for.
Mm-hmm.
It'll come to us in different ways. This so-called future is even so shifted around that it's no longer literal. The year seems to have gone by quickly now. Even though it was so slow as it was in it, and the years of Trump and this and that's 5 years already. How unbelievable it is. It seems like 5 minutes or 50 minutes or a movie that we watched. So we're in it, but not of it in a way.
It's more where with carrot soup is on Tuesday. It's a kind of-
Well, there was a movie where the boy was in a concentration camp, and he remembered. He said when he thought back when he was free, and he thought back of it, he says, "You know, there was a beauty in being in the camp with friends, but especially having carrot soup." He remembered, even though they were kicking the shit out of him and killing him and doing all that, there was carrot soup that he really was looking forward to every time.
Hmm.
Did you see that movie, Derek? Fateless?
Yeah, Fateless. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty good.
Okay. I'll see you all.
Oh,
Thanks
Maybe I'll
thank
see
you.
some of you tomorrow night, but maybe Sunday, Kai, I'll see you.
Yes, yes, I think so.
But take it easy. It's easy going. Although this question of missing was pretty strong, I felt that to discuss that with you, the missing and some relationships, it looks like that obviously it's built around a broken heart. The differences between the people are so strong that and yet they're so intense on having this experience that you see, and they make therapy of it. But then I say, look, the people themselves are so intent that they've created. So when I look at the broken heart, I see the broken heart to be a dialogue with the energy, not a psychological state or something like that. But that's something that now, what would be the ultimate broken heart in the love affair is the passing away of one while there's still a conversation going on in absence. Then I say, okay, the lover dies. And you could see as they were dying, you would have something of a broken heart and wanting them to hang around a bit longer or this or that. So you see, you would be having a conversation, and your actions would be with the energy, make the person comfortable. You try to do this for them. So you see that you're kind of having a conversation with the energy in that anyway. So all I'm talking about is illuminating what we're doing. Now, and in the absence, the relationship continues, but it's not as possessive in the absence. It's a reflection. And so I do feel that all of these elements are happening while we're living our everyday. And they are in the memory and they're in the reflection looking back. And I think they're in the absence, they're having more of an effect that many of the love relationships exist more in absence than in presence. And I say, well, the absence reaches the soul. If in fact you can have it in presence, where cuddling is as much as a reward as you need, just a simple cuddling or goofiness or whatever. You want that now, Kai?
Yes.
Okay, so then be aware of that. That is just a hey baby then. There's someone to say hey baby to with no trip.
Yes.
And that, what about you, Ursha? You're okay with giving your thumb a kiss?
Yes.
There's nothing Pilates you can do? And Derek, you're okay with this weird stuff here?
Yeah, it seems like the cuddle is almost inherent in a lot of these relationships, just by being in their presence.
You know, when you really look at the pictures, these ancient pictures then of lovemaking, the Ka and all that, you start to see the inherent integrity of a truth running through this. You see that the quest for a true love. But then you also discover that you've had a true love in your body all along. And so you start to see that it hasn't been absent. It has been, but as you become aware that you have been navigating through the world, but your eye is fixed on something else. And there are moments you see where you've had true love, where you had to do, where babies were necessary, or this or that. There was also had to be a true love, even though it may not have been an advantageous love. You could have done it, but you see that somehow you were a fool for this feeling. And then you see in retrospect, even though you were a fool, you were not stupid. You see how brilliant you were.
Mhm.
So then you see that hooking up with someone and getting them a green card was not exactly, it was almost Einsteinian in its mathematics. Do you understand?
Mm.
Now, let's say you've been, in the last 20 years, you've been through a grid of mathematics. Your son likes mathematics now, right? Okay. There are some tapes I was going to send where show you how to, in your everyday, how you have mathematics.
Mm.
That's why I also say, but if you can also find this ACL books or something online that show you American Sign Language.
Mhm.
There are some movements, once you get them down, even the alphabet, so I knew the alphabet from being a kid, and we knew that, so that comes back to me a lot. But then just something simple like saying, wow, so all this goofiness comes. But there are some beautiful balletic movements that also come. And so I felt that I've been trying that out a little bit. Some of the, but even silent, when I'm walking, I do the alphabet all the time and have a conversation with one hand to the other one or whatever. But it's just a practice. So I think that would be very good for your thumbs there, where it would just come naturally, where it wouldn't have to be a strain, but you would see when to
Yes.
use the thumb, when not to use it.
I have a neighbor who knows sign languages, and she's going to give me lessons.
Yeah, I would get that down, but just the alphabet itself. And then also there is another way of moving the body. It's called from ship to ship. They talk to each other with flags. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, So I
Oh,
remember
yeah.
doing it.
Mm.
There was a kind of dance where you would have whole conversations with someone on the ship across the way.
That's cool.
So
I like
that I
that.
always liked, this naturalness where you're kind of, and person who understands it also, you're sharing something.
Yes.
Hmm?
I just read an article about Bell, the inventor of the telephone. His wife was deaf, and he wanted to force deaf people to learn reading lips, because otherwise he could see them as not functioning, which was that they
But
were not.
when you hang out with the deaf people, you see how much fun they make of people who can talk. That the people can talk don't have a clue about these people, what they're thinking, what they're going about. So it's like they kind of make fun of people who can't do it. Because they don't even exist to these people who, So then it's interesting when you start, but if you've had all your senses and you lose some, it's like that sense of smell that we were talking about. You don't realize how much of an impact it has in your everyday.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that becoming aware of your everyday through loss allows you to see that what you're looking for is happening inherently in the situation. What do you say, Kai? How deeply do you feel that it's not therapeutic, but kind of truth? So do you want it to manifest already?
Yes.
Then that would require something of an agreement of the situation you're in, no?
Yes,
Not that let's say
we're,
you're not allowed to be sneaky.
yeah.
You could be discreet, but you can't be allowed to be, your quest for a true love can't be made into a sneaky, shitty thing that you have to hide. So let's say there's a difference between discretion and hiding.
Yeah.
So in the past, the self would hide because it knew how the impact it could have on the circumstance.
Right.
But now the circumstance knows. And so let's say that you're creating a circumstance where each person is free to fall in love. They're not free to be sneaks or trips or this or that, but there is an agreement. Even with the kids who say, look, Pop, you're free to fall in love. No one's on your case. You don't have to do this to us and do that to us in order to do your thing. You don't have to kill mommy. We don't, that's kind of lame.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been really given a privileged situation. While the rest of the world is dying and up in the air, we've had a privileged civilization. We've been studying of how to have a fucking 5-minute honest conversation. It may take us 20 years to find out how to, and it will take someone fucking dying before we say, let a heartfelt conversation. So you see, there was always waiting in the wings. It's just requiring a true thing to happen, where the people don't possess the story any longer. They have more of a feeling for the love that they shared and the releasing of it. And from that, you find you would be happy for the person that you were with, that fallen in love and this and that. Just an honesty, not a reactive sense that continues the story. So you're in it and you've been working it. Whether it's Academy Award performance yet, we'll see. But basically, I do feel that most of the people in the story with you have a glimmer of what you're about. And even if they fight with it, they still can't violate it too deeply or whatever. But you're essentially, you're creatively free, and then you may even be literally free. But you don't have to hide anything that has its own beauty. So I feel that you're remarkably exploring an area that's extremely challenging, and yet it is that's why I say memory is a big thing. Because you see that it has a relationship to something that's happening, but it also is a creative act. Do you feel that the elements are still waiting for you? Because I told you when I came back from India the first time, the mystical India kind of fell away to accidental meeting with Doctor, which kind of showed another dimension of the journey. That once you saw it, it entered into the story. But when I got back to Brooklyn and knocked on the door, that story had moved on. Mm-hmm. But it moved on in a way that was human. It didn't allow any assertion or any of this or that. It was kind of based on the people were sharing real feelings. Mm-hmm. It was my thought that something would still be waiting there.
Right.
Okay. And that set up a stage where there was someone waiting, unknown. Right. That was not so much, that was waiting for the literal story to be finished. Mm-hmm. So that somehow you were free to have this experience. Now, this is without figuring out, but it was all coming out of that conversation.
With Doctor.
That hidden in the story is a true love.
Right.
But you're also in your story. So hidden in your, so that's also what happened with Doctor, I think, in Goa then. When he first came to the States, I think that the States actually freed the story, not India. Mm-hmm. Because it freed him from India to some degree and to the circumstance he was in, where an exchange of feelings were normal. Where in India at the time, exchange of feelings were hidden and organized.
Yeah.
exchange of feelings had instant relationships and situations like that that didn't need any trip or any persuasion or anything like that. It was a similarity of feelings that allowed a kind of friendship to take place. So I think he discovered that dimension there. And then when going back to Goa, then, but there was no real home to go back to in India after Goa. Goa was our creation. I think then the relationship then with Martha then took shape where they were together and then they created a reality for themselves out of that while they had a family. And okay. So I think that it was this management where it was okay then with the family, which would have been the wildest of things, and then a return to the village and this and that and a whole interaction. So we'll see. And it resembled Aurobindo's relationship somehow, where their love affair became a kind of creative act or a spiritual act that had an effect, and yet it made peace with its past.
Mm.
But we'll see. But you're okay for now.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so let's say you're managing time. And so the situation, the love affair is timeless, but this literal situation has time in it.
That's interesting. Okay.
It's not so much what to do,
Yeah.
but let's say there's Mary. Now, we've given poor Mary the whole energy where she can say, hey, baby, and sure, let's try it. Or she'll say, oh, come on, I've set up this or that, or we can get it together. And I say, okay, so we made it like a movie for ourselves. Then we enter the story and we have this movie, and people watching us think they're watching a movie for the moment also.
Yeah.
You know, okay. And so we come from a movie place. And they say, why? I say, because it had to have that in it for me to do it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say then there's a secret is revealed. I'm less a citizen in the world that way or whatever, but it had to have a hey baby or what's going on, or even a kid, even a joke with the doctor or something like that for me to do it. And I say, why? And I said, because, then I'll take care of my own health alone. I feel it's okay. It's a balancing act. So if in fact it has that feeling in it, or that schmaltz in it, then I can also take it, but I'm not so dependent of fear of dying or needing to do it or doing that. It is almost purely a thou kind of creative situation where I'm jumping out of the mirror into the literal story.
Mhm.
But I think it may be physically, that's actually what's also taking place. That somehow there is a space before you're pulled into the story of doing. There's more of a mañana feeling of, we can do it tomorrow or this, or you have time. If it's the right thing, we'll see. So I feel you're managing that. Do you feel that? And sometimes when you become a piece of shit, then you understand that you're being kicked out of the story.
Yes, but I don't feel that way right now. I feel like
No, I'm talking, there may be moments when you see the motive of the other person is so strong that they have to dehumanize you.
yes.
So it's not like you're really being treated like you are purposely being treated that way because they're attempting to make a move.
Yes.
You understand? And so then they have to kind of make it righteous looking.
exactly.
Again, no, I'm saying the avoidance of an honest conversation is brilliant.
Yeah. Yes.
So even the saying, it's a bit too much for me now, or any kind of honest conversation, we like to make our own thing happen, and they say, okay, but then can you lighten up your attachment with the children then? If I also create an alternative circumstance,
Yes.
is there enough trust? Is there enough trust that? Okay. So you understand that all of these can't be said unless they're really said from a true place.
Yes.
So what sounds impossible, it says, how could you not say this? You see the impossibility because, in fact, everyone needs to come from a similar space for the conversation to take place. And everyone needs to see that somehow their grace is linked to each other.
Mm.
But it's not only a psychological trip or something like that. It is, in fact, each person that would be a moment waiting in the wings, that we all had the possibility. So let's say in retrospect, you visit the space and you see it was hidden in plain sight, but it needed somehow, you're working a situation where somehow everyone kind of needs to be in the same page for respecting what's happening for you. So something you could have easily left like this or that if you wanted to be, you're caring for something. So that kind of has to be respected in a way. And when it's perceived, then I think that when it's perceived what you're doing mutually, even with the children, they all know it, but perceiving it, and usually you have to come close to losing it before you see that you've been doing something remarkable. And I've been seeing you, watching you doing something remarkable and trying to give some hints or structure around it without interfering with it, Okay. Namaste. We'll see you.
Namaste, Danny.
Thank you so
See you
much.
tomorrow, Derek. We'll see you. Take care.
Thanks, Dan.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Hey.
Oh, hi, Joan.
Oh, yes, I was just thinking about her and saying, I haven't
You were
seen her.
thinking about it.
There she is.
Hi, Urja.
Good to see you.
You working hard, Joan?
Yeah, I have the day off today. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's good to go out there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going out, Ursula, at all?
Well, not very far. I can't even
Oh.
ride my bike right now. So,
Oh, really? Yeah.
but no, I find nice little corners of. I have a rabbit that comes every day in the front lawn. I can see it from my
Now
window.
we got coyotes all around us, coyotes, and they're kind of really bold coyotes.
Ooh,
And they, but not tough looking. They look
they're
beautiful.
beautiful.
Actually. They look pretty beautiful, and they're just walking slowly past, like
Wow.
moseying. I used to kid around with Wells when he said, "What was the philosophy?" I said, "Mosey." You just mosey in the room and mosey philosophy. And these boy, they look like beautiful dogs or wolves or something like that. Huh? But they're just moseying around the property.
That's interesting. They're coming so close.
Well, I think they're after the gophers and well, they may even be after people.
Yikes.
Well, you can hire them for the gophers.
Well, when you see them, you want to go over and say, how you
Yeah.
doing? Pet them.
Pet them.
So they may be tricking you into a weird scene here.
Right.
But everything is needing water, I guess. But it is also blossoming. A lot of the pollen is out there, but it's blossoming. And sometimes the wind with it, it seems so happy, the trees, the way
Yes,
they're moving.
we had so much
So
rain.
it's all weird.
We had rain and snow and storm, and It's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's pretty weird. Now it's going to be 75 degrees though and warm, so it should be pretty dry.
Yes.
Okay, again, see
Okay,
you.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.